Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining our session. My name is Iona Papatuma. I'm a member of the Active Learning Network group, and I'm chairing this session today. So just a couple of things before we start. If you haven't already, please make sure that you mute your mic and feel free to use the chat throughout the session for comments or questions, and I'll keep an eye on it. And you might have noticed already that the session is being recorded. So if you don't feel comfortable, feel free to turn off your cameras. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker for today, Ellen Nicholls from Nottingham Trent University, who will be talking about NTU's team-based learning pilot project, if I remember it well. So we'll aim for a 20-minute talk followed by Q&A. Over to you, Ellen.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to start by trying to share my slides, and if you could let me know if you can see that, that would be wonderful. Excellent. Thank you and welcome everyone. Lovely to be here today. I'm juggling screens today, so you'll have to keep me on track if things come into the chat and just shout out. Please do feel free to comment throughout, to ask questions, to use your microphones when prompted. Yeah, great to be here. I have a little bit of a cold today, so if you're struggling to hear me, let me know as well. But I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm Dr. Ellen Nicholls. I'm one of the senior educational developers at Nottingham Trent University, and I'm delighted to be here today to present this paper on empowering student confidence and success, insights from NTU's team-based learning pilot. And to give you a bit of an outline of what this session will look like, if my slides will let me go forward, there we go. We'll start by having a think about what team-based learning is, what the pedagogy looks like and how it's structured, before thinking collectively about how TBL can enhance student confidence. And I'll finish the talk with what our key findings were from the team-based learning pilot project, before entering into a bit more discussion about some of the implications of that. But the story actually starts just over 10 years ago when NTU made the decision to adopt the active collaborative learning pedagogy Scale Up as its signature approach to teaching and learning. And as you may well know, Scale Up is an acronym and it stands for Student-Centered Active Learning Environment with Upside Down Pedagogies. Essentially, in a nutshell, it's an active mode of learning which offers an alternative to traditional lectures. So in Scale Up, students encounter course content for the first time outside of class via independent pre-work, before yet then using that information in class through collaborative application activities in strategically formed group. So rather than predominantly listening to and passively transmitting information to students, students learn through solving problems, sharing ideas, giving and receiving feedback, and teaching each other. It's underpinned by 6 core active collaborative learning components, which hopefully will be familiar to you. So we have backward assessment design, flipped learning, strategic group formation, chunked learning activities, public thinking with peer feedback, and formative support from the lecturer. And it's through using those 6 tried and tested components that NTU have found that you can create the perfect student-centered environment where collaboration can take place. So NTU's ACL journey is 10 years or more in the making. But we weren't happy with just one approach to active collaborative learning. Scale Up's been rigorously evaluated over the last 10 years at NTU, and we've got really good findings from those evaluations that shows how the pedagogy addresses attainment and progression gaps for our students. But we wanted to offer our lecturers more optionality around which active collaborative learning approaches they might want or choose to use in the classroom, with some really good, robust evidence to support that. And that is where our journey with team-based learning has started. We introduced TBL last academic year, 2023-24, and we evaluated that through a pilot project to understand whether this active collaborative learning approach also worked as well as Scale Up in an NTU context. So for those of you that may or may not be familiar with TBL, TBL is a form of active collaborative learning as well, and it follows a precise pedagogical structure which moves beyond students simply working together as a team on collaborative tasks, which is sometimes what people think when they hear the name. So instead, in TBL, students work with the same strategically formed team of 5 to 7 students for the duration of the module, the duration of the lessons that you have TBL planned for. And it follows a structured form of flipped learning, a specific sequence of individual study before class, then readiness assurance, multiple choice quizzes in class, and application activities in class as well, to create a motivational framework for students learning. And to break that down a little bit more, if you're unfamiliar, there are kind of four key distinct stages of TBL delivery, beginning with that individual study. So students undertake pre-work ahead of class so that the didactic lecture content that you'd usually expect to happen in class can be taken out of the session. And that is followed by an individual readiness assurance test, which is the first thing that students undertake. It's a multiple choice quiz which tests their knowledge on what they were asked to do before the session, essentially the reading or the pre-work that they'd undertaken. And importantly, so this can be anything from 5 to 10 questions. It depends on how long your lesson is. But importantly, after they've done that individual quiz, they don't find out which questions they got wrong or right at that point. That's because they're then asked to repeat the exact same quiz in a team context through the team readiness assurance test. So as a team, students redo those questions, and they go through a period of kind of bringing what they know from the pre-work to the table, and that's when it can get quite noisy. There's quite a buzz and an atmosphere in the room. Students debate, they negotiate with one another as they come up with the right answer, and they keep answering those questions until they've got all of them right and everyone is as ready as possible to proceed with the lesson. And together, those individual and team readiness assurance tests should take about 25% of the overall time of the session. Um, after the team test, you can offer a period of corrective instruction or a mini lecture, so you can address any common misconceptions that might have arisen through the quizzing process. But importantly, that testing prepares students for application activities, and this would take about 80% of the time in class. It involves debate, justification, inter-team discussion, and it can be students working on one big activity together or several shorter activities, all contextualized to their studies. It should be, the whole process should be linked with work like learning. So it would take it would draw upon those workplace competencies that we want to see developed in students, and it would take, as I said, the majority of the class time. So as you can see, there's a very precise pedagogical structure here, where teamwork is developed through the process. And this is this pedagogical structure is what we were looking at and what we implemented last year at NTU. So I want to give an opportunity to pause here to hear some of your thoughts about where you can see opportunities in TBL for peer-to-peer collaboration to develop student confidence, drawing upon your own experience and context. What do you think the benefits of this are? If you wouldn't mind, either you can put your hand up or unmute yourself, or you can pop in the chat your thoughts. Where do you see opportunities in that for student confidence to be developed? I can't see any hands up, but do
I no, yeah, just finding. Okay, I found the raise my hand. I'll raise it.
hello,
Hi,
hi.
how are you doing? Yeah,
So,
I love TBL. I haven't really used it or been in a project where they've been using it in earnest, sort of like all the different component parts, and there's special cards, aren't there? What are they? IRATs and TRATs, and
yes, yeah.
they're the first few questions, aren't they? Um, so. I mean, yeah, but I love the idea of also 80% of the time being given to an application task as well, where I guess they're applying their understanding and their ideas, and I guess that's where you develop student confidence. When you say peer to peer, is that student to student, or is it tutors tutors peer to peer?
As
Like,
in students working with one another is what I meant there.
yeah. Well, I can see plenty of benefits of answering a question, and then or then I think it's really good when you're then asked other students to come in, particularly if they've got a different opinion, and to discuss the answers.
Yes, absolutely. That kind of exposure to diversity of viewpoints through verbal interaction.
I've seen something where if they've all got the same answer and there's a certain percentage of them have got the right answer, would you still then go into a team, a TRAT, a team, ask them to go into teams and answer the question again?
Yes, I think it's this important part of the kind of consolidation of knowledge process and ensuring you get that exposure to divergent thinking at that stage in the kind of lesson, so that even where you've got good understanding across a group, it can be important to extend that thinking beyond one simple choice to justification of that choice. Even people might have different justifications for coming to that right answer. So I think that's an important part of the process. Thank you, Paolo. I can see there's some people agreeing with you in the chat as well. So we have people saying ability to work in teams for integrated project modules, supporting students to find their voice in their teams as they have to argue their answers. Yeah, developing and promoting those opportunities for students to actually speak and interact with one another, seeing they have the right answer and feeling confident enough to share with a wider group teacher. Yeah, absolutely. One thing that you can do in the IRAT process is get students to jot down their confidence level next to the answer. So if you think, oh, I think that was right, I'm about 80% sure, and seeing that confidence develop week on week, so that the quieter students can then say, well, actually last week I did get them all right, so maybe this week I'll have a little bit more confidence to speak up. Janet says, I didn't quite understand. If they don't find out whether their individual answers were right, how would this help their confidence in sharing their answers or views with the smaller or wider group? I think, Janet, it's that confidence score next to it can really help that part, but not finding out the answer at that stage is to then give them an opportunity as a team to enter into that negotiation and debate, so they can kind of get exposure to that divergent thinking, as I mentioned. But I think there's a valid point there. Certainly, the confidence builds accumulatively week on week. So that's a kind of interesting one to address. There's lots of lovely comments coming through. Yep, so peer-to-peer interaction would be less stressful. Thank you. Okay, what I might do is collate some of these and put them onto the. I think there was previously there's been padlets, but it'd be good, interesting to hear more thoughts as we develop through the session and to respond to those on the Padlet. Paolo, was you about to say something else?
I don't know if I think a couple of people got their hands up, Nikki and Paul. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
apologies, I'm finding it hard to see that.
Yeah, I think it was Nikki first and then Paul.
Thank you, Ina.
Yeah.
Hi, Ellen. Yeah,
Hi, Nikki.
I can see all the benefits. I have a lot of questions over kind of how it would work in practice. I don't know if you're going to get onto that later because I don't want to kind of disrupt your flow. So do you want me to hold off on that or ask you now?
Perhaps park that and we'll come back. If you can ask me again at the end of the session and see if the question's still there, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, yeah,
You'll
we'll
have
do
to
it.
answer it or to discuss it.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And sorry about this, I can't see people's hands.
No, it's fine. I think, Paul, you were next. I think you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everybody. Paul Mabbott from De Montfort University. That's really, really interesting, everything you've been saying there, Alan, and something which we're quite keen to adopt, certainly to overcome this apparent resistance to students interacting in the classroom. I do lots of group work, but what you've suggested there with the team-based learning sounds very interesting and something which I'd like to find more about. Can you give us an example of actually where you've used that?
Well, I can give examples from the pilot modules, for sure. So it happened in lots. We had it happening across 7 different academic schools, from science and technology through to architecture. We had it arts and humanities, agricultural studies, all sorts. It was used in, one example would be from a nutrition module for like an animal based course, where it was used to develop students' sort of professional competencies. So one of the activities that one of our TBL lecturers was really keen on is using Play-Doh in the application activities to get to our students to model parts of the gastrointestinal system, for example. The pre-work was obviously designed to support them to achieve that, and the multiple choice quizzing allowed them to have the knowledge in order to then complete that application activity altogether in those groups. So that would be one very brief small snippet of one specific lesson in that context. The lecturer used it for about 50% of her lessons within that module, and interspersed week on week, sort of every other week, with lectures and seminars, just so the novelty factor for TBL wasn't lost. And she found that kind of balance really worked for her.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Combining it with sort of hands-on active learning as well sounds really interesting. Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem, that's quite all right. I will endeavour to keep looking through these comments. There's been some questions about the scratch cards. So we didn't use the scratch cards in our module context. We used our virtual learning environments, which had a functionality where you could use multiple choice quizzing and release answers in certain stages, so we didn't have to pay for more expensive software or worry about the sustainability costs of continuing to print scratch cards. So there are viable alternatives to the scratch card system with pros and cons on either end.
Sorry, final question if I may. Which BLE do you use?
It's called Brightspace, so it's actually called Now in an NTU context, so it's compatible with various platforms. That happy to provide more information should you want it.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I will press on just in the interest of time and hopefully circle back to some of these really interesting discussion points. But I do want to make sure that I've shown you some of our findings from the pilot project. So this was all about discovering if, like Scale Up, TBL actually works in an NTU context. And this was a massive collaborative effort on the part of practitioners, evaluators, academic lecturers, professional services right across the university. We piloted it in 22 different modules of different sizes, and it reached almost 2,000 students across that academic year. Our evaluation design, just to give you a bit more detail there, was started with this kind of hypothesis that exposure to the TBL pedagogy would increase students' academic behavioural confidence, functioning as the change mechanism for improving module outcomes for participating students. And that was really broken down into 3 core research questions. So first of all, does TBL have a positive impact on students' academic behavioural confidence? Is the hypothesized impact of TBL on academic behavioural confidence a predictor of student achievement in terms of improved module outcomes? And then finally, is there a particular benefit in terms of reducing attainment gaps for our successful students or our students from widening participation backgrounds? It was a mixed methods evaluation design. We conducted an impact evaluation with the student data and an implementation and process evaluation with data collected from staff. So in terms of our impact evaluation, we did a pre and post survey using a validated scale, which measured students' academic behavioural confidence. And students undertook those in the very first TBL lesson they had, and then again in the very last TBL lesson that they had. We did a comparative module outcomes analysis. So we compared our treatment modules, our 23-24 modules, with either historic data from within the lifespan of that module or a suitable comparator module if that module was new for that academic year. And then in terms of the qualitative side, we had student focus groups, we had a staff survey, and we had staff feedback chats as well. And what I want to do is just to zoom in on that student survey analysis for academic behavioural confidence. We received we had a really good uptake of responses from the survey. There was well over 500 responses to our baseline survey. And when we searched for exact matches between the pre and post survey, we found 112 paired answers, which we identified and analysed. So that all that means is that student A we would identify as taking the pre and the post survey, so there's an exact match on either end, and then we averaged it out. And we found that 8 out of 15 survey items showed significant statistical differences between the pre and the post test. So there is enough evidence to suggest that TBL has had an impact on students' academic behavioural confidence, which was fantastic to find. And to kind of give you a bit more of a depth of insight there, there's the following items here that you can see on the screen that had statistically significant results. So that students study effectively on their own during independent study, that they respond to questions asked by lecturer in front of a full lecture theatre, they manage their workload to meet deadlines, give a presentation to a small group of fellow students, engage in academic debate with their peers, ask lecturers questions about the material that is being taught during the session, writing in the academic style, and pass assessments at the first attempt. And I really want to zoom in here on the impact that it's had on students' confidence surrounding verbal communication in particular. We found that this was particularly noteworthy, and it suggests that TBL is particularly suitable for modules with learning outcomes that seek to authentically assess students' development of verbal communication and verbal skills. And that's really illustrated here by one of our lecturers. This is a quotation from one of our feedback chats. And it says, there were actually some individuals speaking within those teams who have never, ever put their hand up in class before. And it was really nice to see that. So we were really proud of those results. And we could begin to trace the impact on students' academic behavioural confidence to their module outcomes through analysis, through the analysis that was undertaken. And I will just pause here to let you know that I'm not a statistician, and I'm also not a quantitative expert. And that work was completed by my colleague, Dr. Lawrence Shaw, who is a principal lecturer in mathematics here at NTU. But I will just show you a little bit about how that was done and what the results were on module outcomes. So if I can fast forward, there we go. As I said, we compared either from within the lifespan of the module or to a suitable comparator module, depending on if the module was new to the academic year or not. That meant that there were some modules that had no suitable comparator, so they weren't included in the analysis. And there were some modules that shared one cohort of students, so the data was merged for that. And after all that, we ended up with 11 cohorts to analyse based on the data. And that was analysed using statistical software called ArtAnova. And if you're interested and you're really into your statistics, want to learn more, please do reach out and I will put you in touch with Lawrence, who will be more than happy to discuss that further with you. What I will show you is this box and whisker plot, which shows the distribution of module grades for those 11 cohorts of students that were exposed to TBL. Don't worry if this is a little bit of gobbledygook. It is a little bit to me as well. But what you should know is that the red boxes are the TBL boxes, the TBL modules. The blue boxes are the non-TBL comparators. The central lines within those boxes shows the grades of the middle students, the median students. The top of the box is the top students, the bottom of the box is the third quartile of students, and then the whiskers, the lines, are the maximum minimum grades. The dots are outliers. All of that's to say that the red boxes here are consistently higher than the blue boxes, and that is showing that TBL is consistently associated with higher module outcomes than their comparators. You're very welcome to look at that in more detail should you be interested in statistics. But I will just show you a quote from one of our focus group students that says, that reflects on the improvement in grades in the MCQs. So this is an international student, and she said, in the TRAT, I was able to interact with people and get to understand the parts where I failed the IRATs. So it was really helpful in making up my scores. If I take the IRAT alone, I get 5 out of 8, and I discuss it with my peer and we answer the question together, we might end up getting higher scores, and that's really helpful. So some key results. Module level comparisons show that TBL has a consistently positive impact upon student outcomes, even when module differences are accounted for. When we disaggregated if you think back to those research questions that I mentioned, when we disaggregated the data for ethnic minority students and widening participation students, TBL was not necessarily benefiting those students anymore. There was no statistically significant results there, but they did feel the overall benefit of its effect. Looking deeper, TBL is having a greater impact at the lower end of the grade scale, which possibly has a benefit on successful students in that regard who are overrepresented at the lower end of the grading matrix. So there's some potential promising evidence to pursue there for us as well. So finally, NTU has achieved type 2 OFS evidence that TBL improves students' academic behavioural confidence, and we have really good evidence that it's also positively impacting those module outcomes as well. Our next steps are to continue to share with the rest of the sector through publication and through conference presentations, and hear how we think this might benefit the sector more widely. So conscious of time, but interested to know which aspects of the research findings you are most surprised by, or any key comments that you might have based on those findings today.
Nikki, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Those results are really impressive, and I'm really interested in this. I work at the business school at Sussex University, so we do a lot of work in groups, and we do a lot of assessed group work. So I'm interested in the confidence aspect, but also we do a lot of group work because that's what businesses want as one of the key kind of recruitment criteria, you know, the ability to work in teams. But the students absolutely hate group work because of working with other students who may not pull their weight, because they don't turn up to class, etc., etc. So what I'm interested in as a question is how in practice do you get this to work? And to answer your question, what are you most surprised about, is I've got a question about how you form the teams. So do they form themselves, or do you kind of put them in groups? How does it work when students don't turn up to class? And how do you get them to do the pre-work? Because even if I set my students a tiny case study to read, literally a paragraph before a class, they don't do it. I know they won't. So I have to allow time in class to do it. So how do you get them to do pre-work? I'm astonished. There must be, you know, do you set them an element of assessment to get them to do it? I would love to get to the point where we can achieve this, because it looks amazing, but how do you get them to do it and to turn up, and how do you form the groups?
Yes, there's a few different questions there. So the groups one, you can form groups in many different ways, as you can in any kind of active learning. The preferred way to do that is to do it in a data informed way. So you can use student data to create mixed ability groups, but it's whatever logic works for you. So where you've got students that are in different courses taking a shared module, can be really beneficial to mix up groups based on what a diversity of courses that they're studying. If you're wanting to build professional competencies, it might be that based on the placements they might be about to go on, could be trying to create maximum diversity in terms of ethnicity and international or nationalities. It's all about having a strategy, pick a strategy, any strategy that isn't self-selection, really. So and to do that at the start, I think inducting students into different ways of learning is really important from the off. So explaining to students what the pedagogy is in a very explicit way, how it's going to benefit them, how it's linked to your teaching and learning outcomes for the module, and is going to directly align to their assessment and learning outcomes as a result of it, is a really important part of getting students bought into the process. And that should help in terms of providing another motivation for them to engage in the pre-work. I think you should expect students to not do the pre-work, but not all of. Look, we want to create environments where we're promoting them to do that as much as possible, even though we're preparing for them not to do it, if that makes sense. There's lots of different strategies to support students to engage in flipped learning. With the pilot, we didn't award any summative assessment to the the TBL pedagogy components, but where you really see an uptake and an uplift in student engagement and attendance is where you do that. So the University of Bradford do this. They're real leaders in TBL. So they attribute summative assessment marks to different elements of the pedagogy. So it would be something like small, 5% for IRATs, 5% for TRATs, some of them, not all of them, a randomly selected application activity, peer assessment. I can find the breakdown of how Bradford do it. We didn't do that because of the fact it was a pilot, essentially. So you'd have to go through SASC, or what's called SASC at NTU, so academic standards and quality meetings, to get it approved, and module documents and all that sort of thing changed. So we wanted to test to see if it worked first. Attendance did affect participation. We found where modules were running it in the first semester, in the first year, the engagement was much better. But if the drop-off had already happened in terms of engagement and attendance, then those that were running new for spring semester just weren't getting that uptake. So there were challenges and barriers there, and I think the whole sector is experiencing that, even in all kinds of pedagogical settings. So there's a few answers to get the ball rolling to some of the questions that you've asked, Nikki, but some really pertinent ones for us to continue to consider, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. No
problem at all. Thank you. So Janet says, I'm thinking the alignment of the pre-work questions and varied purposeful activities that all build on what's come before would be really important. Absolutely, Janet. It's kind of constructive alignment, really, isn't it? Not to throw out pedagogical terminology too readily, but it's making that cohesion of journey throughout the process and really explicitly showing where that all aligns up. Yes, flipped learning does need a whole team approach, persistence and insistence. You can get into a cycle of students don't complete the pre-work, so lecturer covers the material again in lessons. So students don't complete the pre-work because they know it's going to be done again in lessons, and you end up in this vicious cycle. And it's figuring out how to break that cycle and what's going to work in different contexts to support the kind of flipped approach. It's a challenge. Are there any other hands up that I'm not seeing?
No, not at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Maybe we can move on to the next session, if that's okay, Ellen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the excellent questions. I'll go back through the chat and I'll try and comment and answer as much as possible.